to the page to let everyone know we started streaming. It'll actually start rolling here in about 5 minutes. So I'm going to go take a quick leak and then we'll get going. Oh, time to get comfy. Yeah, I mean, it's an investment in something you use all the time. Just DJ Hedgehog. Yeah, that sounds about right. right, we're about to go. You ready? Hello and welcome to the very first episode of Struggle Interrupted. I'm the host, DJ Hedgehog. Some of you may know me as Corey. I'm a longtime Vampire fan, and I'm here to talk a little bit about some decks that we've seen, the meta in general, and just kind of express our love for the game through dissecting it and tearing it apart. I'm joined tonight by a close friend and fellow Vampire player, Jeff Hare. Jeff, how you doing tonight, man?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Yeah, so you're joining us tonight from Columbus, Ohio. How's everything going up there?
Boring.
So how long have you been playing Vampire, Jeff?
Well, I started playing 20 years ago, I would say. Took an extended break, so I would have to guess that I played for 8 years, then took like a 10-year break, and then started up in the last 2 years.
Yeah, I would say, speak for yourself, of course, but I think both of us have started playing a lot more with having been introduced to Lackey. And Lackey kind of allows for individuals to find people across the globe to play the game with, and it's helpful in places where there isn't an established meta. So I live in Cincinnati. There's not a lot of people down here that play the game, so getting people together to play, it's kind of challenging. I think Columbus is the same way, right?
Yeah, that's accurate. Lackey's been essential to me playing the game again. If I had to rely on live events, I probably wouldn't play more than 12 games a year, and that really wouldn't be enough to hold my interest.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of thinking you can do about decks, but until you see them in action, it's hard to actually understand how they flow and work. And it's a unique game where you can't just play it a few times and understand that the conditions are so different across every game. You really have to put it through its paces, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, it's depending on the deck and various factors. Probably takes 10 to 15 games to finalize the deck, or in some cases abandon it. And I'm playing 12 games a year. It's just that's an untenable situation.
Sure, absolutely. So when you sit down to build a deck, what are some of the things you're drawn to? What are your favorite archetypes? What do you like doing most?
I certainly tend towards defensive combat decks.
Yeah, I think my memory of you was playing a pretty ferocious Ravnos deck, and I know you're a big fan of them.
Oh yeah. I mean, right. I've losing with Ravnos is a great hobby of mine.
Why do you say losing, Jeff? Let's talk about it for just a second. Why is that a losing proposition for you?
Because they're really bad. I don't want to get too much into that, but they're not particularly competitive outside of one archetype that doesn't interest me, the clown card type of deck.
Sure, yeah, and it's a pretty binary situation, and I know you and I have talked about that a lot. Something that either wins or loses based on the table it's at. It's not very much fun. You just kind of play the cards you're given, and either it wins or it doesn't. And that's not very exciting.
Yeah, there's minimal decision making. You just play it, and things happen or they don't happen.
So I want to start off tonight talking about the European Championships and kind of look at the two decks that we saw emerge victorious from the championships. And I know you and I are really critical of European players, not in like a personal sense, but just when we look at the decks, it can be hard for us to understand. So I think the lens that we're going to kind of look at things through is how does this fit into the other decks we see coming from Europe, and how do you achieve victory with what we see? Because this neither of these decks I would say are standard US decks, for better or worse, right?
I don't know what order you're doing them in, but one of them might be becoming more of a standard US deck, but the other is probably not at all standard.
So which one do you mean?
The standard Master Phase Stealth Bleed deck. I think that's something that Americans are becoming more aware of.
Sure.
genie's kind of out of that bottle. But the combat oriented deck, I also master heavy. I don't know that fits into any kind of American meta.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have the decks pulled up here, and the first one I'm looking at is the girls variant. I know that's a very popular name for it. And one of the first things, we're just looking at the crypt. It's huge. It's a massive crypt. So, and then how do we bring those out a little more quickly? I see some Zilla's Valley in the list, which I think is interesting, but it's costly. So your only real way to mitigate pool loss is to bounce with Oxinia. So when you look at that crypt, how would you say you would order bringing minions out? Do you go for the master phase first? Do you go for the bounce? Is it situational? I mean, because you have to make that choice pretty early on.
Well, first off, share your screen. I do not believe that I have.
Sorry about that.
But I mean, it's not a deck that I have a great deal of experience with. I would assume that in most cases you're going to bring out the master phase enabler. Who's that in? We've got Sibel.
Yeah.
Although I'm sure in some cases, if you're getting bled hard, you'll go a different route. But I mean, if you look at the deck list, it's 50 out of 78 cards are master cards.
Sure. And that was one of the big things that stood out to me. I know we kind of mentioned this when we were talking earlier, but a 78 card deck. So most of the time I see girls, they're at 90. Looks like this individual chose to, and I should have put their names, and I apologize to those players. No disrespect. I just neglect, I guess. Should have put your names in there, but I apologize. 78 cards instead of the standard 90, and I see that the cuts all came from the utility cards. So like the actions, pretty common were enticement, which isn't featured here. Intimidation is another action I see pretty regularly. The action modifier package is really low too, so there's not a big cuts in the stealth package. What do you think the thought process was there in reducing those cards?
Yeah, he's got a lot of permanent bleeders, so he's just playing stealth and bleeding for 3 most of the time, and he has a few modifiers for some surprises.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, and I think a lot of the conversations, and I definitely don't want to get into that right now, around Asher tablets, but, I think this specific deck works in part because of Oxinia. Because the survivability of being able to pitch those masters, you have that additional hand fix to get masters out of your hand, which also protects you from bleeds. So, so when we look at the bigger conversation around Asher tablets and girls, how that fits in there, if there were changes to Oxinia, do you think that changes anything with the Asher tablet situation?
I mean, Asher tablets has proven to be strong on its own in various deck types. So I don't know that would directly address this. If you did something to Oxinia, such as perhaps she has to tap to use her ability, which is obviously going to make it very hard to do that again until your turn. That's going to make that vampire a lot weaker. I mean, as it stands, her ability can maybe be deceptively good because you're bouncing bounce bleeds, you're bouncing direct bleeds. I mean, it's not rare to see her bouncing 2 or 3 bleeds a turn.
Sure. Yeah, and the cost is...
pass around, whatever you want to call it.
What appears to be a cost is really a benefit, right?
Yeah. Oh, we're saying in terms of cycling cards?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and you're bringing them back with Ashers anyway. So if you do, pitch a card that you want to use, you do have access to it through the Asher tablet. So there's that combo nature there.
Yeah, absolutely. I've regularly requested cross-table players that. So say if I'm being preyed on by someone playing Oxinia, and their predator is bouncing, I've routinely requested that they bounce directly to me, so that they cannot cycle their cards and improve their hand.
Sure, yeah.
I've never had anyone actually do it, but I always am asking them to.
Yeah.
Uh, because let's I mean, this deck is approximately 65% master cards.
Yeah.
They're always holding one. It's not a question.
Guaranteed. Definitely interesting. I thought one card that I find missing. So like a lot of my insight into the European meta, other than what I see online, would be U.S. players that come back and tell these stories about the kind of decks they see and the prevalence of some cards. And one thing that's always stressed by U.S. players is the presence of direct intervention in decks. And neither of the decks that we're going to look at here from the EC actually have DI in it. And I think that this one, I think it might have been an error. And without talking to the deck creator and getting a full understanding, it's hard to say. But being able to DI a bounce from your prey is huge. It's just such a huge play when you're trying to oust with your own bleeds and bounced bleeds. So that all that momentum, and you take away their defense. Because most people are just leaning so heavily on that deflection. I think that's a miss here. I don't know. What are your thoughts on DI in general?
I mean, it's an extremely strong card. If this deck is functioning properly, you should probably have a lot of pool.
Yeah.
So the cost's negligible. I mean, I don't like, in the context of this, I don't really want to get into a lot of like balance discussions, but
Sure.
But I mean, DI is extremely broad in its effect. So just canceling someone's reaction that is, you're essentially bleeding them, and you're canceling their reaction card, which is sort of out of the spirit of the card. I'm not sure if I'm making that point clear.
No, I think that makes sense. I mean, it's normally seen as more of a protective card, something that kind of helps you out in a pinch, whether you're trying to defend yourself, or I mean, I guess that's pretty much it. Incoming rush or DIing a grapple. Yeah, exactly. I see that a lot more, and that's what I think when I think DI. But when I started playing my version of this deck, most frequently I was using DI to cancel bounce, and just seeing how strong that effect was, and then still having the utility to come back and say, here are the other things I want to do with this, makes me want to run two. And so to see that, we're hearing all these stories about Europe and how there's a lot of DI there, and not seeing any in these decks that I feel like could use it was definitely something strange for me.
I would tend to agree. I don't know if it was an accidental omission or if it was on purpose. One thought that I had just looking at this, and I haven't analyzed the crypt options a lot, but there's quite a lot of votes potentially available here.
Yeah.
So it would seem to me a good idea to put a few vote actions in here, political actions in here. Like a banishment type of card, or cancel empowerment, and the whole Asher's liquidation deck type really benefits from just throwing random cards in and playing them when they're useful and ignoring them when they're not.
Yeah.
So I mean, I would probably, if I could, get rid of Lucien, put in somebody else who has votes and permanent bleed, and kind of go that route.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think Lucien, like, my least favorite part, and I've heard the joke multiple times from multiple people, he's perfect at being Archon investigated. And that is the reason why I really don't want to play that guy. Just one Archon investigation, all of a sudden my life's a lot harder. 11 cap just right down the tubes. Plus the no votes, I agree. I think, again, in the version that I play, I think Banishment has been an all-star card. That one action, you sit and you make sure you get your hand right to pass it, and then you can knock out a defender for essentially the entire game. And it's an ousting move. akin to, a Pentex at the right time, but even stronger because that guy's just gone. There's no recovering it except spending that pull and bringing him back. Definitely worth a one of, right?
I would say so, yeah.
Yeah, makes sense to me. So let's get down to the nitty gritty. So I'm playing this deck. What is it that I do not want to see?
Combat.
Oh my god! So it's funny that you mentioned combat. It's funny that you mentioned that because day 2, someone thought, "Hey, there's a lot of girls decks here. Let me tell you what I want to play to deal with these girls decks." And the answer is combat, right?
Yeah, I mean that would appear to be the thought process. I haven't talked to the deck creator or the player, so I just have to surmise from the data I have available, which is the deck list and how it did. But yeah, when I look at this deck, quite honestly, I'm a little bit confused.
Sure. What makes you confused? Like, what's on the onset? What's your first question that you would ask this person?
I have a lot of questions.
I've got so many questions.
I'm concerned that this deck is 25-ish master cards, 25-ish combat cards, in a 65-card deck. So whatever, about 40% or so combat, 40% master cards. I'm not going to be able to move the master cards unless I have what is her name? Nana Baruka or something?
Right, yeah, Nana's
I'm going to
real
need
answer.
her to move that 40% of the deck. And I'm going to need another minion to move the other 40%. So I'm locked in to having to have 2 minions, both of which are large, before the deck starts to function, before it flows in any sensible manner.
Right.
And I mean, any sort of proper bleed deck, you're going to be dead within 15 minutes. Any sort of weenie deck, you're going to be dead within 20 minutes.
Yeah, no Scourge, and that was really shocking to me. I mean, that's the kind of deck that would really just break it off on this deck would be, some weenies popping out, and Scourge is such an easy, free add.
Yeah, and I agree with that. That seems a little odd, but I mean, you take your in our area we would the John Bell special kind of thing. You just take stealth, take bleed cards, you take sudden reversals. This deck is ousted immediately.
Sure.
So I would call this deck an extreme meta call, as best I can determine.
Yeah.
Because it's probably going to do pretty well against decks playing fat, squishy minions, fat, vulnerable minions, like the other deck that had all 10 and 11 caps that have very, very little combat defense. Now, I still do have some questions about how you're going to effectively oust those decks, because, we're looking at our ousting package here. We've got 4 Anarch Revolt. Additionally, let's look at, we have 4 Anarch Converts to play 4 Anarch Revolts and nothing else. That's adding an additional level of clunkiness to the deck.
Sure. Well,
we have all these big minions, and then we have to do this. So,
I mean, there's definitely a view, I think, of the Anarch Converts adding in crypt acceleration through being
shrinking
able to...
your crypt. Sure,
right,
I
exactly.
get that. Right, but it's something else you have to spend pool on and transfers on in a deck that's already quite top-heavy.
Right, and you're only running 1 Info Highway. You do only have 1 Dreams of the Sphinx. So and the 1 Montreal, which I would not have added to this deck, but again, you've got some there. Yeah,
we look at any kind of crypt acceleration. We've got Dreams of the Sphinx, could do that. We've got 1 Info Highway, same thing. We've got Montreal, which could be like that, and then we've got Mobare Market,
And then people in Europe are rolling their eyes at us because, like, we only speak English poorly. I'm sure someone over there understands how to actually pronounce that. And if you do, send us an email at teamhedgehoggaming@gmail.com and tell us how to pronounce it. If you can add an umlaut, extra points. But yeah, I mean, to your point, ousting power, you've got 4 bleed cards, which you do have the ability to recycle. But reading the report, again, so sorry I didn't write your name down here, sir, no disrespect. But it was Otto, was that the guy's name?
Otto, I believe is his name.
Gotcha. Thank you, Jeff. That was strong. Good recall. He said that he did not trigger Ashers more than once the entire day. So we're four games.
Well,
one Asher triggered.
Let's think about that. And that's another complaint that I have with this deck, okay? So we've got, in my opinion, some questionable masters. We've got Montreal. I don't see how you're ever going to defend it. Someone else is just going to take it. You've got Barara. And I mean, I guess in theory you have enough Laban to make that viable, but I'm not sure how in love with that I am.
You said Mabara Market?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. But I'm sorry. So the point of that is some of these masters I'm not too sure about. Then we look at 6 Asher tablets. And as best I can determine, this deck is anticipating a field with these girls type decks. So I don't see how you're ever going to be able to use Asher tablets. So you have 6, and the other people are playing 15, 18. They're playing Parthenon. You're going to have to draw half your deck on average to get a cycle out of it. I just don't see how that's ever going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, there's a player that I ran into at Origins. His name is David, and he and I were talking about the value of Ashers in the game as far as in relation to combat decks. Someone who can actually use it, where you can run a smaller deck. You don't always have, he said that he thinks combat decks should run 100, and I think that was our fundamental disagreement. I think Asher tablets allows you to run a more streamlined deck, and then use that recursion to build yourself back up and keep that engine going, so you see things more consistently. And I think so I'm in line with the thinking of running them in small quantities, but not if it's a meta call specifically against a deck that utilizes them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, if I wanted to play this deck, I would run 9 Ashers, and I would get rid of some other cards that I could do without.
Yeah.
Because if I'm going to put them in my deck, I would like to have some reasonable chance for it to actually happen.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that, like you said, kind of the ousting power. So you've got the Revolts, the Fame, the Deep Song, and the Entrancement. It's really the only forward momentum you have. So without recurring those things, it's not giving you a lot of opportunities to put that pressure down.
There's a Dragonbound, but
that's true.
I don't know how much I love that either. I mean, I don't think it's terrible in here, but personally, I like Dragonbound for combat decks that can block, so that they cannot rescue.
Mm-hmm.
And when they can rescue, it just makes them want to do it. And I don't know. I'm not as in love with it that way.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, this deck can get 3 Intercept with the individual who has Johnny Winthrop, a Cat's Guidance, a Sense of Savage Way in hand. The only other card, and I liked this ad, even though the people who can play it are one. I'm sorry, well marked. That was not even the one I was thinking of. I was thinking it was the Gangrel Ante card for Enkidu. The one that gives +2 against the direct actions. So I misread the card there. So, yeah, you're only getting to 3 Intercept max. And again...
Right, it's not going to have a lot of consistency. I mean, I don't know how reliable that is.
Yeah, so let me ask you a question. If you were to change Mighty Grapple into any card that could add value to this deck, what would it be?
Oh, wow.
One card.
Yeah, okay, so that would be another question I have. The combat package is, overall, I don't have too many problems with it. There's a lot of kind of random cards, which, again, like I had previously said, that ties into the the Ashers type thing. When that one random card becomes good, you get it back. I do not feel like there are enough grapples in this deck. I would think 6 to 7 would be the correct number.
Yeah.
And I believe the Otso, if I'm recalling and pronouncing the name correct, but at any rate, the player commented the same thing himself.
Yes,
that there were not enough grapples.
He said at least one more, and I think that Mighty Grapple could easily be another Immortal Grapple.
I don't know what the Mighty Grapple is for. I mean, I don't know. Maybe he could clarify. I can't say why it's there.
To make it into the winning deck archive would be my guess. Something
I'm
like
sure it's there.
Odd Flex. Here's a Mighty Grapple. I hope you enjoy. I mean, I had to. Most of the time, I look at a card and I can tell by the art. Boom! This is what this card is. Just by looking at the art from a far distance. Lackey helps with that. When I really shrink my card, my hand, it's really tiny. I have to get like a microscope out.
Oh yeah. Sometimes. Another question or concern that I would have with this deck is that I want to punch things, but I don't want anyone to punch me.
Yeah.
Because I'm very fragile. I have these huge minions that, in all reality, I'm going to have my Master Phase person. I'm going to have Nana, and then I'm going to have some other guy with a built-in rush. So I have one guy to fight with that I cannot let get beat up. And this combat package is not good enough to me for that. I feel like you're fragile to ag damage, which the player said himself. Even beyond that, you're going to be fragile to any combat because your only defense is Taste of Vitae plus big damage, and
right.
Can't guarantee that these things are happening.
Yeah, that's a very good point. What do you do when your guys go to torpor? Someone has one intercept and you just eat poop.
And I think that can give us some insight maybe into how the games were played. To the extent that I know, just from reading the report, and the finals, I think everybody just kind of sat around. It was a bunch of fragile combat decks that didn't want to fight each other. And everybody just kind of sat around, and then he lunged, in the last minute and got a VP, and that was that. And then even in a prior round, he did a table split deal with another combat deck, probably again because they were scared to fight each other because their combat decks are incredibly fragile. And then, like you were saying, how the European meta is different.
Yeah.
And it is, for sure. The biggest difference I notice is how much talking there seems to be. I mean, people are talking about hunts on, like, the second or third turn.
Yeah.
This just isn't something that happens in America. And I can't remember the last time in live play, or I've probably seen a couple times on Lackey, but I can't remember the last time in live play in America that I have seen any kind of table split.
Oh, like a deal, yeah. I mean, like I said, I think there was a time early on in my time playing V-Test where the people were just, kind of afraid of each other, and they're like, all right, you go that way, I go that way, and then we'll see who wins. Essentially, who's going to get that third VP.
Yeah, I mean, and I've certainly heard stories from the most recent Origins where some of the European players that came over, that 15 minutes into the game, they declared that they had no chance and they wanted to split the table with someone. Like, that's just not something we see here.
Well, do you think that that's a strategic, again, a development? So when we look at the player base in Europe, it's much more, much larger. So do you think that development is just the way that they enjoy the game, or do you think it's a strategic part of the game we're not really utilizing properly?
I don't know that one is correct. I will say that they time out a lot of games that we do not time out.
Yeah.
I will say that I don't have fun talking about hunts on the second turn. And I will say that certainly in America, if you talk too much, people will go out of their way to screw you.
Yep. Yeah,
So
spite is huge.
I don't know why. I'm not saying that anyone's better or worse, but there's some clear differences there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, I think we've done a good job kind of taking apart this deck, and I appreciate your insight there. So what I'd like to do now is kind of shift focus on some of the decks that you and I have talked about in the past. One of which was a deck that I brought to Newark, Ohio, which is a relatively local play group, where I brought a deck that included Maris. I'd like to kind of break that down, and the theme tonight I'd like to keep on combat. Specifically, so part of the reason why I felt like this was a good choice was because it's combat, but it's not combat. You know what I mean? Like, it's combat for people who can't fight. And there was a time in playing VTES for you and I, especially in our play group, where if you brought Malkavian combat with no fortitude, you were just dead. And now I think it has its place here. So let's kind of look at Lackey now.
Oh, wow. I like your zombie plant avatar.
Zombie plant? What?
Am I looking? Is this what I'm looking at?
What's a zombie? What are you talking about?
Oh, wow. It looks different on your on the shared screen. I've got the ham.
Yeah.
And you've got some kind of weird zombie dude, but on the screen in actual Lackey, it looks different. I have no idea why. It doesn't really matter. We probably just move on.
Oh, it's a squirrel.
It is not at all a squirrel.
No, it's not. It's Rick from Rick and Morty. All you people out there who love Rick and Morty, go check it out. It's great. Or who haven't seen it, should go check it out. But so looking at this deck, so again, I really wanted to fight, and a big part of that was Alastor. And so for those of you who don't know, and I know I talked Jeff Zier about it, I was really into playing a game called Netrunner, and Netrunner is all about finding the cards that allow you to cheat things out. So you either want to get them at a lower cost, or tutor them, get them from your deck or from your ash heap. You want to find a way to change the rules a little bit, and that's where you find success. And I think Alastor gives you the opportunity to play with really expensive equipment and be successful with it, because it also includes that rush. So I saw that, thought it was fun. Maris was a vampire I saw in a random pickup game on Lackey, and learned that you could burn or use her ability. So let's kind of look at her real quick. Her ability to burn a blood to give any minion +1 intercept infinite times. I mean, I guess up to 9 times. However many blood she has, you can burn it all to get intercept. And I thought that was something that's, again, you want to bend the rules. That's always the best things in a card game, are the things that let you bend the rules to your advantage. So we're getting cheap equipment. We're creating intercept on minions around the table as many times as I can burn blood. And I thought that would be a really interesting deck. So this is what I actually brought to the tournament. And let's, Jeff, can you see it pretty clearly?
Yeah, I won't be able to move anything, because for some reason the shared screen is a little bit different than a Lackey game that we are currently in.
That is weird. I think I've expanded my screen is probably what did it, but that's okay. We can kind of talk through things.
Oh, let's experiment. Let me just try to move this anarchist uprising. This
is a work in progress, people. I appreciate if there are people watching this at any point in time. I appreciate you sticking.
Yes, it did move. We're you're inverted. That's I think what it is.
Oh, you're on the other side of the table.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Yeah. So one of the things that going into this tournament, I think for knowledge people at home, was this was the last tournament for the old rules on Parity Shift and Pentex. So the deck obviously had to have a Pentex in it, at least one, probably 2. So it was 76 cards. I thought 1 was probably enough, and had to run at least some Parity Shift. And if we look at the crypt, we have the people to run it. So we got this Justicar as the all-star. Jeff, what's your thought on 4 versus 5 or 6? If I really want to see Maris, is 4 enough?
Most of the time, if you run 5, you have a 93% chance to get them. If you run 4, you have 84% chance. So I mean, that's up to you. If you're going to run 5, you're paying a price in other ways.
Sure.
Having many duplicates and all that. So here, I mean, we've got 4 of her. We've got Leandro, who can take her responsibilities for Alastor away. And we've got some princes that can take her responsibilities for some of these other things, the parity shifts and such, the second trads. So if we don't hit her, we're certainly hitting some of these other guys.
Yeah.
So I think it's fine here.
No, I agree with that. And that's kind of the reason I went with Leandro and talking about some changes just right out of the gate. I just didn't like him, how both his cost and performance. Now, what I did like was the bleed, but he's a one-of. You can't really count on that. So when I goals for this deck as far as changing it would be probably finding a replacement for Leandro, either a Justicar or a cheaper Prince. Because I've pulled in everyone who has Obfuscate and Superior Aspects. That was the goal as far as the titled minions. So either find a cheaper Prince who has one or both of those skills, or another Justicar again who has that. So trying to reduce the cost from that 11 cap. And plus the table disruption and table hate that Leandro brings. It's a whole other beast,
Not to mention his bad haircut.
It's horrible. And actually, I'm going to switch real quick because I actually brought up a picture of old Leandro, and I'm like, why? I don't know which one's worse. Here's what Leandro.
Oh my god! Oh wow! This is. Ooh.
Yeah,
I forgot that was a thing. They're both pretty bad.
They're really both really terrible, and I apologize if the artist, for some godforsaken reason, is watching this show, and you think we're insulting. I draw at a kindergarten level, so the art that I produce is terrible, and I have respect for people who can do this as a profession. However, Leandro needs some work in both forms, as far as I am concerned. Okay. Maybe I'm not the right person to ask, but Leandro. At any rate, Leandro probably needs to go again. So that would probably be my first change. I'm going to tap him here as someone we can kind of look at removing. I did like the 4 Maris. Gregor had both at Superior. He's the Prince. He costs 7. That's why I went with 3, but I don't necessarily need 3. Any thoughts there?
It depends on what the other options are.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the drawbacks of using Lackey in this situation. I like visualizing the cards, and it's nice to be able to spread them out like this. However, we can't really see the other options, but we can kind of go to the deck list and pull them out there.
You could, to an extent. If you can go to... we don't have to worry about this now, if you don't want it.
Oh, the deck editor?
Yeah, you go to the deck editor and type in. I don't. It doesn't have the world's greatest search program.
Sure.
But you could just, I don't know, do like Malkavian and then sort of by group. And, that'll get you somewhere.
Oh no! Yeah, this is no bueno. We're gonna have to experiment with this some other time.
Yeah, that's fine. So we can just do it ourselves or whatever. You can open up Amaranth and look at what's available there.
Yeah, for sure. So there's an idea, just kind of changing the crypt up a little bit. And so the Masters, I really like the Master package here. There could be some changes. I would like to have the Hunting Ground. There's never enough blood in this deck. So we got the Rack, we've got Papillon, and we also have Giant's Blood. So a lot of ways to generate beads on the minions who need them. Villain, so we can actually produce more than one minion. We could probably do some cuts on Villain, maybe go down to 4. I don't know. Switch to Blood Doll maybe to keep a more constant stream. What are your thoughts there, Jeff?
Just one moment. Looking at what are we here? We're group 1, 2.
2, 3. Group 2, 3.
What a crazy world.
It's bonkers.
So yeah, the Blood Doll makes sense in situations where putting blood back on is something you expect to need to do, and where you're not going to need a massive pool infusion. So like a deck like this would be good because you can defend yourself pretty effectively. So you can run to low pool and not worry too much. So I would be 100% okay with Blood Dolls there. That would depend somewhat on your master totals because the trifle is a nice thing. Sort of a side note, I don't like Vessel really much at all. So I very rarely ever play that.
So give me an idea. What situations do you think it's a good choice for Vessel? At what point am I making the right choice in playing that Vessel?
When you're playing Danielle Duran, or you're doing some other hijinks in your untapped phase. I've seen people do
Jake Washington.
Jake Washington.
Jake the Snake.
Yeah, Jake.
Come to give you some blood.
Yeah, he's there, but just in general, I do not like the card. It seems counterproductive. I'm paying pool for the privilege of later on moving my beads around. That's not what I'm looking for.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the Vessels, it's kind of wonky. And, a lot of people are like, well, you blow up the Blood Doll. Well, what if you don't blow up a Blood Doll? You still have to play this card. You're not getting your blood back any other way. It still costs a pool.
You're still throwing your beads away.
Yeah, you don't need them anyway. Just the whole game is about resource.
I mean, I think in a lot of things there's a groupthink element, and Vitesse certainly has that. Somebody somewhere decided that Vessel is good and Blood Doll is bad, so I almost never see Blood Dolls and see a lot of Vessels. I don't agree.
Yeah, but okay, so let's kind of flip that on its head. If there's a lot of Vessels out there, playing Blood Doll seems like a bad choice, right?
Nah, it's great.
Let them blow it up.
It's free. I get to use it right away. If you blow it up, I don't care. You just paid a bead to blow up my Blood Doll. That's fine. And it really never really syncs up like that. People are just playing. They're playing their Vessels as they draw them. They're not waiting to use them tactically to blow up a Blood Doll. And then, should they blow up your Blood Doll? Or is there someone who's next to you? Is it someone who's next to you and wants to blow up the Blood Doll? These things all have to line up, and they just don't that often.
Yeah, that makes sense. So as far as the Villains here, so I think it's still prudent to play 1 or 2 just in case you need that quick infusion of pool. And if we're going to add Blood Dolls, I think we need to make some cuts to the Masters in general. So if I did, what do you think, like about 2 or 3 Villain? Do you think that's still, is that too many?
I mean, I've oftentimes been comfortable with like 3 Villain, 3 Blood Doll in a deck. What is this deck? Is it 70?
Excuse me, 76 right now.
Okay. And
at this point, Pentex can probably go.
Yeah, with the rules change, and this isn't a deck that needs to deny blocking, so you can just go ahead and remove them, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'd say this deck specifically. I mean, I think it still plays a part in a lot of decks, but we don't have to really get into that now. But this one, not really so much.
Yeah, I don't see it.
I liked Guardian Angel a lot. I would probably play 2 if I had the spots for it. So I don't know if there's other places to make cuts. I mean, Montreal is nice, but not necessary. Jack is absolutely necessary. I don't know. Any thoughts on the master package here as far as other changes?
See. We've got the Anar. I don't know. How married to wider view are you?
That's a good question. I think if I were to remove one of the Gregors, I would feel a lot better about removing the wider view. But right now, there's a lot of duplicates and triplicates, right? So, what are the chances you see a crypt that has all the people you want?
A question that I always ask myself, and when I first started playing, I wanted to play as many different minions in my crypt as possible, and I've really switched on that. I want to look at what I can realistically influence out, and I don't need anything else other than what I can realistically influence out. So I would ask the question, are you going to make both of these princes plus a Justicar plus a Watenda? I don't see that. I think you're probably going to make your Justicar, you're going to make a prince, you're going to make Watenda, and that's probably the most you're ever going to make.
Yeah.
So, and there's definitely value in diversifying, having two different princes and stuff like that. But I don't know. I don't know that wider view is going to be critical for this type of deck. Like, you could maybe play like I guess I sort of lost my train of thought there.
No, it's okay.
I apologize.
No, it's all right. I really like the idea of removing cards and not replacing them too. So we don't necessarily have to make room. If there are things that can be jettisoned that don't play a role here, let's get closer to 60, especially here because we got to get those Alastors, right? We got to get it early. We got to hit it.
I guess the point that I was basically making is that I don't know that realistically you're ever going to make more than 3 minions.
Sure.
When you have a 4-card crypt, so having one duplicate is fine. And if necessary, you can pay one to see one. I don't think that's the end of the world.
Yeah, well, that makes total sense. All right, so there's some cuts to that Master Phase package, which I think are some really solid cuts. I'm really married to this single Camarilla segregation. I want the table to hate me. Screw them, like...
You're like, hey, why aren't you playing these good cards?
Yeah, did you know that Camarilla is good? I did. Not so much anymore.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's a one of too. It's good. The Alastor, I mean, the question there is how many is the correct amount to play?
Yeah.
I'm sure that's a question that you had to address.
Well, you got to get it early, and that was kind of my concern. And I think at 76 cards, 5 is the right number. So if we can go down, I think that number can go down, but it's got to be like a 15-to-1 ratio, kind of.
Right, and you have to look at what equipment you have.
Right, yeah, 2 games in the tournament, I drew both of the AK-47s before I could get an Alastor off. That's frustrating as hell, And I don't think adding another AK-47 is the way to go either.
No.
So I'm not really sure what the answer is. Just kind of suck it.
I would say I would probably go 1 AK, 1 assault rifle, because one is not clearly better than the other.
Sure.
Sometimes one is better and sometimes another is better. I think it would be nice to have the ability to pick the one that seems to be good this time.
Yeah. So what? In my mind, anytime you're not making additional strikes, AK is better. When would the assault rifle be better?
Well, what if you're taking ag?
So at least you're doing all 4.
Right. What if? And it happened. In the finals of the tournament that you played that, I one of the events already happened. I attacked you with a Geru. I guess we already said that. My Geru has additional strikes. If you'd have used an assault rifle, I wouldn't have even torped you because you would have killed me immediately. And with the AK, you had to play a glancing blow just to get the privilege of blowing up my Geru. and then
going to torpor. Yeah,
right. So they're not. No one is not clearly better, but I personally I would go with one of each.
No, that makes. I think that's a really a strong thing. It's kind of like the pro tip I got from Martin was if you're going to run 2 Anarchist Uprising, one of them should be an Ancilla Empowerment.
Absolutely.
Because what if you get delayed, and that's just such like a having the option to play either or both is really strong. So that's a good call out, Jeff. I appreciate it.
And we could ask for new development. Like we could get a card instead of called Alastor, we could call it Blalstor, and it could have the exact same text and somehow be a new card. Obviously, I'm being facetious. It's really quite strange, though, that a game has 2 cards that do exactly the same thing with a different name.
No, totally agree. Yeah,
I don't even know how that happened. I don't want to think about it because it'll make my head explode.
So one of the most popular theories, and I don't want to conspiracy theory it up here, right? I'm not all about that life, but one of the most popular theories that I've heard, popular for me, I don't know. Anyways, the one of my favorite theories was that Sabbat War was meant to be a new base set, and that it was going to kind of erase the things that had come before it to start the game fresh. So that's why we saw Scouting Mission instead of Govern, and Anarchist Uprising, I believe, was a product of that set. I could be just talking right out of my butt, and I apologize to those people out there who were screaming at the screen. It was nobody or anyone. But yeah, I think that was part of it. I think it was just a renamed card. It got new art, so they renamed it.
I mean, I still don't understand why a new base set, if that's what it was, why that would mandate reprinting the same card with a new name. Why wouldn't you just use the old name?
Reasons? I don't know. Okay.
The only thing, I mean, to me, it's just some kind of sloppiness. Like somebody went to the bathroom when they were supposed to be doing their job.
Has anyone seen a card like this before? No, call it Anarchist Uprising. You're fine.
Yeah.
It's a new idea.
And then as far as you've got the Ivory Bow, that's great. I mean, what else are you going to play?
Well, originally I was running Flamethrower, and I'm like, what's the point? You get one more ag for 3 more pool.
Yeah, I don't.
Or
right.
1 more pool if you've got Alastor. But you're banking again on the Alastor, and sometimes you got to disguise something out. So if I'm disguising out a Ivory Bow, I don't feel too bad about it.
And then you've got maybe a sport bike. I don't know. The issue is with Bola Convergence is it's highly contestable.
Sure.
So I would at least consider a sports bike. But yeah, the other stuff makes sense.
Yeah, just some of the power cuts here. I think now that Parity Shift is kind of seeing a downswing, I'd like to maybe get rid of one of those, and probably the Banishment, especially if I'm getting rid of Leandro. Reigns of Power is still great. If I manage to torp my prey out, that's a huge hit. But Banishment, someone under 9, so 8 caps. Who do you see really like? Let's go through the list. Anton, right? The +1 intercept people that actually matter. People, popular minions. So those would be the people who would be the target for that. So maybe that's more of a meta call. So maybe go with an Ancilla Empowerment.
Yeah, I mean, one nice thing about Banishment is that if you pick your targets wisely, you can generally pass it. There's oftentimes a lot of people that agree that vampire should go on vacation.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, 100%. Yeah, when you have Inner Circle members, Banishment is ridiculously amazing, and when you have a 9 cap, your options have become a lot more limited. And I mean, you can just shoot people in the face, so Banishment might not be as essential.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. So let's look at maybe replacing these 2 cards for the time being. Kind of look at our combat package, and I call it that almost jokingly. 3 telepathic tracking. I think I played 1 And then again, tournaments, tables, all super situational. That telepathic tracking could be huge in a different setting. But I don't know that 2 would hurt my feelings. And gaining another disguised weapon as a fallback, I'm not sure. I mean, maybe just another disguised weapon anyway. What would any changes here, Jeff?
I would probably like another disguised weapon. I would feel. I mean, for a deck like this, I would feel comfortable cutting 1 telepathic tracking. I like to have a couple just for. It can be surprising and disruptive for someone. But you should be able to do a good job of getting into combat with somebody. You can block pretty well, assuming that we're getting our Alastor going, which if we're not, we're just going to cry anyway.
Sure.
We can get into combat every turn. So I would be totally comfortable with 2. The second disguised. I mean, I think that's not a bad add. Although I immediately am noticing 2 taste with Maris. Another taste might even be better.
Yeah, just being able to gain that blood and scoop it up off the ground when you have the opportunity.
Yeah,
could be huge.
But that's a secondary thing. But as far as the disguised weapon, so you're going to be drawing your weapons. They're not just going to sit at the bottom 3 cards of your deck. So, like you said, you drew a bunch of times before you ever had an Alastor or were able to call the Alastor. So you want to have an efficient way to get them out. This deck isn't exactly amazing at stealth. I mean, there is certainly stealth, but you're not going to always be able to equip one straight up, and it saves you in action. So I would be comfortable with 2 in this deck.
Yeah, I agree. I think that was one thing that I was missing. Constantly looking for that disguised weapon because I was in that corner of my Alastor now gets me a Kevlar vest. Is this what I want to do?
That's not what you want to do.
Yeah, exactly. So, so I think adding another disguised weapon is good here. Otherwise, maybe another taste. But I think the 2 behind yous are good. The glancing blows are nice surprises. I'm pretty happy with the rest of that. Do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, we've decided, or you have, or somebody, whatever.
Someone.
The deck is going with the strategy of blocking, getting in combat a lot, and having permanent combat resources. So we have a few transient combat cards that offer some surprises, but yeah, we're really relying on a giant gun and hoping that other people aren't particularly good at fighting.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's exactly it. And so part of the reason Watenda ended up in this deck was because of you. You and I talked about Watenda after I played this deck the first time, didn't have him in there. And just the ability to cancel combat cards really makes you dangerous. Because other people who do want to fight have the cards, and you're just like, well, typically for free, I'm going to tell you can't do that. Maneuvers especially. People think they can get you with that maneuver, and you come in, and Maris allows him to block actions because she can spend the blood on it. So Watenda becomes a really powerful tool in preventing the good combat. I say good,
Yeah, well, Watenda's extremely good. If anyone, any listeners, if you've never played Watenda, just do it. He's incredibly good. You'll understand in short order.
Yeah, absolutely. So, looking at the action modifier area here, the one card that let me down was Old Friends. I'd rather have something that I can get a little more ousting power with. So when I look at my minions, I see 2 of them have Dominate. So there might be an opportunity to play actions or action modifiers that require Dominate, namely Conditioning. And one of the other minions that I know is a Justicar, is an 8-cap Justicar, Anastasi Grazdiad. You know what I'm talking about? The Tremere Justicar is an 8-cap who can steal blood as a strike.
Oh, yeah. He does not have Obfuscate.
He doesn't. And that's one of his downsides. But the theft, the fact that he's a Justicar and he's cheap, The only downside and why I didn't slot him in here originally was because he loses a vote if Maris is also out. So like having them both out really sucks. Because you just
he's an 8-cap prince that can call your Alastor still. It's not so bad.
Right. Yeah, and he's got built-in theft, so he's not necessarily needing a weapon all the time. He's got the Auspex, which is going to allow you to play the Auspex cards, and he's got the Dominate. So that's a thought there, but I don't like Old Friends, and the replacing effect is one of the reasons why I dislike it so much. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that one. So other than that, what do you think about these action modifiers?
One second.
Sure.
I'm just looking at some of the... I've got the Amaranth open. I'm looking at some of the vampires. Got this. Okay. You're on 2-3. That's wonderful. I clearly entered this in wrong. Okay. Never mind. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. What was the question again?
Looking at the action modifiers, what are your thoughts?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think one of the problems that you had was that it was maybe hard to oust people.
Yeah.
So, right, you're going to want to improve that situation. What you have to work with is really dominate, because you have basic demontation on one guy.
Yeah.
You have superior on another guy. That's not even really worth it. So yeah, you could do some conditioning. You could play a couple govern just to speed up some ousting when you maybe can clear the board or surprise somebody. So yeah, that's the route that I would go. It would be a few conditioning, a few govern type of thing.
Yeah, give you some additional ousting power, and then you're not relying so much on the political actions too. So it gives us some options there. So I'm looking at the different Justicars, and all the other ones are 10 caps, which is really fantastic.
Yeah, that's there are a lot of them are 10.
And then Anastas de Zagreb. I'm butchering these names. I feel so bad. At any rate, so yeah, adding in some conditioning here would be good. Telepathic vote counting worked as intended. I think that 3 of is fine. Swallowed by the Night, I think, is huge. I think 3 is right. Would you go up there, or do you think any other cuts you think you would make to this section?
No, I think that's a really good number. So we got the Lost in Crowds. Were there not? Oh, there it is, the Forgotten Labyrinth. I mean, I'm thinking about how much I like that. So we definitely want to get our Alastor through, and then after that, what do we have? We could maybe play one on Rush, possibly an equip action. Okay, yeah, I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah, I thought 2 was. I was originally at 3, and I came down to 2. And I think that's probably the right answer. The 1 Alastor, and if I need it for an equip action, anything like that.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with the stealth package. Seems adequate. You have a few crazy high value stealth cards, like Obfuscate can do and no one else can do, and that should be enough for what you need.
Perfect. And I'm actually really happy with the reactions, but do you have any feedback just on the reactions we have there? Like I said, it performed well. Focused on untap effects because, Maris gives you the intercept. What are your thoughts?
Let's see. So how easy is Eagle Sight to use here? I mean, Eagle Sight may not be the most necessary because Maris is shoving intercept on other people's throats, so you have a lot of table actions.
Sure.
Like that. Although 1 doesn't really hurt my feelings, but I could consider cutting. I get 2 enemies enemy. This seems fine. Yeah, I mean, the only thing I could think of is maybe if you needed 2 for space, or it wasn't performing the way you wanted, get rid of Eagle Sight.
Gotcha. All right. Well, I appreciate your input on this deck. I think we have some really good feedback, and after the show, I'm going to go through and we're going to make those changes. And all of the decks that we look at tonight, I'm going to make publicly available. Just go to the comment section of either the stream or YouTube, and you'll be able to find these deck lists, including the Maris deck that we just talked about and some of the changes we made. And I think it's going to be a really fantastic deck to play. And hopefully I see people out there playing the European Championship decks. Tell me and tell Jeff especially how wrong he is about that combat deck and how good it is at bringing home the bacon. So we're about at the end of the show, and I have one last thing, one last segment I'd really like to do, and keeping in theme with combat. And I think combat is going to be something that's going to push the meta forward, is fighting, the threat of combat at least. I asked Jeff to build a deck in an iron deck building competition. I want to see the best deck you can build with Dark Steel. Now, Dark Steel doesn't seem like a hard card to use, but Obtenebrate's not great unless you're stealth bleeding or doing votes, in my opinion. I think the vampires that have those disciplines are all super expensive, so there are some restrictions there. But beyond that, it's environmental damage. It gives you a maneuver. So to me, that's a card that I think I should see everywhere all the time, and I have never once seen a Dark Steel deck. And if I haven't, never used Dark Steel because it died too quickly. So with all of that in mind, Jeff, I have pulled up the deck that you have provided to me for this challenge, and I'd like you to kind of walk me through your thought process here. So, Jeff, what's the name of this deck?
Blue Steel.
And where's that from?
I'm pretty sure that's from Zoolander.
Yeah, so it was the look he gave.
Yeah.
Turned and deflect bullets, I think.
I feel like Lord Vauxhall is doing his best to give that look, but failing.
What's going on with his mouth? I mean, I'm just looking at his mouth, and I got some serious issues here.
There's Vitas art is strange.
It's something. So let's look at the crypt, man. So walk me through your crypt real quick.
Okay, so I mean, I guess the just a quick tie into what you're saying, why you've never seen this. The answer is pretty straightforward. The only people who have those disciplines, for the most part, I mean, you'll find a couple random weirdos, but are going to be Lasombra, and Lasombra are better off stealth bleeding, and even beyond that, Lasombra are better off being cased and then stealth bleeding. So that's why you don't see this.
You just dunked on them. Like if there was a basketball hoop, you would just dunk on those, and then you become Kiasid, get good.
Yeah, that's right. Well, that's when you've mastered Lasombra, you are now cased. So that's a big reason why. And then the crypts are quite wonky. Vitas is a charming game. That would be one way to say it. You're at the mercy of what vampires were randomly printed when you're trying to make your crypts. And I'm fairly certain that a lot of the vampires that have historically been released came directly from the clan splat books and from the NPC lists, and adapting their discipline spreads into this game. There doesn't appear to be any particular strategy or rationale for a lot of the decisions. So how that ties into this deck, if you look at, I believe it's group 2-3, there are a couple of weenies that have basic Obtenebrate potents. That's appealing. I'm like, oh, I'd like to do that. And then you start to look at who has superior. You got to get some real fatties.
Yeah.
So I'm like, that's not really what I'm looking for. So then I come to this group. Nobody has it at all until 5 capacity. There is no one who can play Dark Steel until capacity 5.
I'm sorry, is that true? You said zero
true.
potential vampires. All right, I'm going to challenge you. Let's look 4 or 5. And while I'm looking for this, I want to put a really nice plug-in for Amaranth Deckbuilder. I know one of the players actually makes this tool, and it is really fantastic. And I know a lot of diehard Secret Library people out there, but once I made the switch, I haven't looked back. So that being said, so let's look. I got Potence, Obtenebration. Let's sort by the youngest here, and oh my god.
Yeah, it's so weird. Like you, how does that even happen? But anyway, and then if you look at Group 2, 3, you'll be equally confused about the lack of superior Obtenebrate Potence. But anyway, so based on what was randomly available to me by the gods of Vites, I picked this group because I felt like I had a chance to be effective with reasonable capacity vampires. I really wanted to get my superior potence. Dark Steel is good enough at the double basic. And then I have, you'll see I have support is mostly just potence. And then later on, I added the 9 and the 10 cap with the titles to potentially interact with power structure, and they both have static combat abilities that could be useful, so I wanted to add them in. And they do have superior dominate. So if I'm going to be bringing them out, I'm almost certainly going to be governing down, so that kind of mitigates their costs somewhat.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, I think, you and I have talked on numerous occasions that combat is bad and combat with fatties is worse. Playing large capacity vampires with the intention of fighting with them is just a recipe for disappointment.
Unless the European Championship.
Oh, come on. Too soon. No, I mean, I think more so, unless you're playing Fortitude, would have been my caveat there, unless you're playing some sort of damage mitigation. But in this case, having those static combat abilities, the titles, and one thing I was surprised as we kind of go through your list, one thing I was surprised was not to see at least one Under Siege. But I guess there are no titles interspersed throughout the other minions, so that makes a lot more sense.
And beyond that, there are quite a few independent and live on.
That's true too. Yeah, the Otenyo and Batter, the Shadow of
Batter Up.
Yeah, Batter Up, 7 cap. So again, the crypt looks solid to me, and I get where you're coming from.
Not amazing, but that's what's available.
Sure. So the master phases look pretty boilerplate. They seem pretty standard. Kind of what I would expect here. Were there any surprises you can think of, or any tough decisions you made when you were building out the masters?
0.
That's exactly what you'd expect. So we're looking through the actions now. I see a total of 6 intercombat actions.
Plus the Haven Uncovered.
Plus the Haven. Okay, so that makes sense. So the ultimate foil here would be Obedience, right? Someone plays Obedience and you're just like, I give up?
I mean, combat has never really had an answer to Obedience. That's
true. That's a good point. Grave Robbing, huge. When it happens, it's just huge. Preternatural Strength is just worth playing. Right? Anything else here that we could add that we didn't?
Yeah, I mean, in all reality, this deck was this is quick to make. Just a lot of it's pretty straightforward. I would say. I know roughly how many rushes I'm going to need. I need some stuff to oust. Grave Robbing is just potentially huge. Preternatural, as you said, is good. I don't really know what much more to add to it. I guess I could say when I build decks, I like to have a certain ratio of actions, and then things that make my actions better, or at least that's how I think about it. That would be either stealth or combat. When you're playing combat, you generally need to play less actions and more things that make your actions better, because combat's clunky and requires a lot of cards. So 15 actions in a 60-card deck. There are going to be days where you don't draw any actions. And it's going to suck.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
You have to do it. That's the situation. I mean, what are you going to do? Play a whole bunch of rushes so you can rush and punch for one?
That's what I prefer to do.
Well,
Get your Dark Steel on.
Live the dream.
So the one surprise I saw here, as far as the action modifiers, was that single Shroud of Absence. Did you just like surprise stealth and get that oust in, or what?
Yeah, as I thought about it, I could even feel good with 2 to 3. So like the stealth rush, yes, that can be huge. People are playing stupid things like Jake Washington and rushes. But even beyond that, I could surprise someone when I turn into a crappy stealth bleed deck, because they're perhaps concerned about my combat, so maybe they've discarded their intercept. I mean, I wouldn't like to play too many. So let's say like at 1, it's an easy discard if it's not helping. True. I mean, I think some people go a little too far with the easy discard thing. You don't want to put a lot of cards in your deck that you don't intend to play and discard. But I think the surprise value here of a 1 is easy. 2 or 3 were making me think more. But I certainly considered more.
So let's get back to the top here. And one of the things that I was shocked by when I pulled the deck in before the cast here, 60-card combat deck. So what's your thought process when you sit down and you're like, well, how am I going to effectively fight with 60 cards?
Well, I would say, first of all, when I first build a deck, I generally like to keep my deck as small as possible, so that I can, I'm forced to keep it simple, not putting in a bunch of random cards. 2, when I make adjustments, they're more impactful, so I can see how they're changing things. And then beyond that, I think a deck should be as small as it needs to be effective. So if you can, 60 cards. As you play this deck, you may learn that it needs to be 70, 80 cards, whatever. So you do that. But in this stage, I've built the deck. I want to play the deck. I want to see how it works. If I run out of cards because I played a long game and been successful, presumably, since I've played a long game, then I can address that later. So maybe I get a VP or 2 and I run out of some steam. That's fine. I mean, I can fix that later.
Yeah. It becomes a exercise in ratios instead of does this work at its core, right?
Right. Yeah. The deck is conceptually successful, and then I can just fatten it out a little bit.
Yeah. So in that 60-card deck, so 1/10 of your deck is Dark Steel, and another 10th is Immortal Grapple. I think that makes sense. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, Dark Steel is supposedly the signature card that I'm trying to use, so, I mean, it makes sense to play a decent amount, and, I mean, Potence Combat, I mean, what else am I going to do? Play Dark Steel and just hope?
Yeah, you just play 13 Dark Steel. You don't play Grapple.
Maybe a Mighty Grapple?
That press is going to come in handy. I'm telling you, man. That guy's going to come from Europe and kick the dog shit out of you. Oh, excuse me. He's going to punch you in the... Oh, man. All right. Well, I appreciate you going through the time and putting this together. Again, like I said, everyone who's watching, anyone who watches in the future, we're going to put these up in the comments section. You can download all the deck lists and play them at your leisure, man. Have fun. Change them, add whatever you want, and tell us. Write us at teamhedgehoggaming@gmail.com. Tell us all about the decks that you play. Tell us how well they do, changes that you made that are relevant. Jeff, I want to say thank you for taking the time to talk tonight. I've had a really good time, man. I hope that we can do this again sometime in the near future.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see what kind of interest there is. Because, I mean, if it's just you and me talking about V-Test, we can do that with a lot less effort.
It becomes kind of a circle jerk at some point, right? You're like, hey, it's just us. This was great. No, man, I had a good time. And for everyone out there listening, thank you for tuning in to Struggle Interrupted. The struggle might be eternal, but we hope to get you out of here in about an hour. So that being said, thank you guys for watching. We'll let you know next time we do something. Thank you very much. Have a good night.